Hello to everyone. I'm really excited. I love this topic, and it's a passion of mine, and I've got a lot of thoughts. Too many thoughts to fit into the time we have today, but that's okay because I think part of this is also like, kind of setting a foundation for a lot of conversations that can be had. Kind of probably the first half of what I'll do tonight, I also shared with the faculty earlier today, because I really think the best way to do this is in partnership. I mean, so much of our kids' emotional lives happens at school and happens in the context of learning with teachers who care about them and love our kids. And then you realize when we can partner that, like the power of all the ways that we think about these things intentionally just dramatically increases. So the first half is very similar to what the faculty got. And then the back half is thinking more specifically from a parenting perspective, from a caregiving perspective. What are the things that we know help kids learn how to manage and navigate their emotional lives? If we're thinking about emotional development as one of the most core things we want to give our kids, how do we do that? We know we're influencing. Like parents know I'm influencing this. I know I'm doing it. And a lot of times it's like, am I screwing my kid up? How many times have I screwed my kid up today? It's like that kind of feeling. But what I hope to be able to do tonight is give you sort of a framework of how to really think intentionally about what you're doing as a caregiver with kids and how that also meshes with what can happen in school. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. I'm a psychologist, so I work in private practice, and I work with a lot of school-age kids and work with a lot of our work we do with families. So even if we're seeing a child who is struggling in some emotional category, most of our work is actually done with the family as the sort of centerpiece of what we're doing. And more often than not, we're also engaging with a school. We're trying to figure out how do we, use language that cuts across all the different things this child's experiencing to really maybe fast track a solution to a problem or enhance how development is unfolding. So that's a lot of the work that we do. So I think about that clinically. And I also work in a school where I'm on a student support team in a school where we do kind of very similar things. So I'll try to show some of those perspectives of how it shows up in different settings. But I'm just going to jump in. I have a lot to say, but absolutely feel free to interrupt me if you have a question. I pretty much said all that. So this talk, I framed it as a talk about cultivating resilience and also teaching our kids how to manage anxiety and stress. For the purposes tonight, just to sort of clarify for us, the concept of resilience can be cut off in so many different ways. Tonight, we're going to talk about it this way. If we want our kids to grow up and be resilient humans, we want them to be able to do this: manage, adapt to, and grow from all of the different kinds of challenges they may face, right? It's pretty easy to say like, yeah, that'd be great. I would love if my kid could do that. I would love to be able to check that box off, right? And then you start reflecting on your own child or the kids you're thinking about now, and you're saying like, all right, well, are they doing this? Have they achieved this yet? Right? Or in what parts of their life do I see them being able to do this, with some fluency or some skill? And I think when parents are really looking at a child who's struggling in some way, this really feels elusive. And it can kind of feel like we're so not on the right track. This is not a child who looks like they're poised to be able to do this someday. And that can be really scary. That has a lot of emotion to it. I shared a story with the faculty earlier today that I think captures this, at least for me, where so I have two kids, 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. When my 13-year-old was about ready to take his first step. He was about ready to walk, right? It was a really exciting time. Like as a parent, you're exhausted. It's that first run of, the first year or so of life. And you're looking at all these milestones happening. And it's like this glorious moment of just like, look at what he can do now and look at what he can do now. And he gets to this place where you're like, I think he's about ready to walk. He was cruising for a while. You can kind of see it happening. He was clearly interested in trying this out. And there was a moment where we kind of had a sense of like, tonight might be the night. So we set up a video camera kind of on the floor in this room with a carpet. And my wife and I were about like 6 feet away from each other, facing each other. And we kept, standing my son up, facing it to the other person. And the other person was kind of like, come on, buddy, you could do it, doing that whole thing. And watching him for about 4 or 5 minutes fail, like fall down, fail, right? And what struck me about thinking about that memory was if you watch the video of those 4 or 5 minutes where my son continuously falls down and fails at this developmental milestone, and you looked at my face or my wife's face, we were absolutely in like our glory. We were in ecstasy. We were so excited to be with him in that failure, right? And even if he was sort of like cranky, like, oh, he's getting upset, we'd be like, no, buddy, you're doing great. Let's do it again. And we're bringing our best self into that moment. We're cheerleaders. We're pep talking. We're smiling. We are absolutely like bathing in how amazing this parenting moment is, right? And I hope you've had experiences like that in your past, right? And I'm thinking about that, and then I'm fast forwarding to a very clear moment of like one of the worst sort of parenting experiences I can remember me doing, just like egregiously ignoring all the stuff I've learned about what to not do as a parent. But, I think my son was now, let's say in 3rd grade, working on, homework, really kind of his first fall of like actual homework. I want to hand this in. I really want to impress my teacher. And he had one of those nights where he probably couldn't even remember his name. Like it just appeared that he just like wasn't functioning cognitively, right? He's sitting down at the kitchen table. I'm trying to make dinner, and he's struggling through a very basic math problem that he knew the answer to. And he was just like, I can't do it, blah, blah, blah. He's kind of like moping and just being sort of like, I know in my mind, I'm like so disappointed that he isn't just better at this, right? And I can feel it, and now it's inconveniencing me because I got to stop cooking and I got to go over here. And I'm like, come on, buddy, you know this. Why aren't you like, I'm like basically yelling at him for having a moment, right? And, and it's one of those moments where it's like, what's the difference between when I was like in glory watching him fail while he isn't walking yet, and now he's just having a rough moment at homework, and I'm like laying into him, right? I mean, you're right. Part of this is like his cuteness definitely had a dip there in the middle. Like he's had some better days and other. But, I know what was happening to me. Like it felt really different. It just felt different to be in that struggle with him. I know what I should have done. I know all the different ways I could have handled that moment patiently and with care and compassion and with like actual like help. I brought none of it to him, right? So what did I teach him, right? When he was young, I taught him that, look, I am here through all these amazing experiences, and even when it's hard, I'm going to be your cheerleader. I'm going to be your support. I'm going to put you in the right position to do the right thing next. I'm going to do all these really helpful things. Fast forward, now what is he learning from me? Dad's a jerk, right? I'm not going with him for help. I'm not going to ask him for these kinds of things, and I certainly don't want to do homework in front of him anymore, right? I mean, I'm getting a little dramatic, but I think you get the gist. This thing changes. Parenting feels really different, especially in the face of challenge. Right? I mean, if he was blasting through the homework, I would have been like, way to go, buddy, good job. But him struggling and how I handled it, that's not what we're looking for, right? And if I'm going to try to help my kiddo be more resilient, it's not going to look like that, right? We know that kids need to face challenge and push through challenge to get stronger, to be more resilient, to do all these things. We know it requires that ingredient, but it can look very different than what I just described, right? So anyway, that's kind of the spirit of where we're living today, right? If we think about resilience and we think about what we want our kids to have to be resilient people, it's the same stuff that we need as adults to be resilient people. This is just a short list. It is not exhaustive. It's not capturing all the different things. But if you just reflect on yourself and you say, when I'm resilient, where is that resilience coming from? It's probably coming from at least some of these, right? Social support. Right? That comes from relationship building. That comes from friendship. That comes from all of these places we know, there's so much meaning and passion in life. Self-control, right? Just the ability to stop ourselves from doing something we'd otherwise want to do, right? Kids have a really hard time with that, right? Just neurologically speaking, they don't have all the equipment that they'll eventually have. Problem-solving abilities, emotional awareness, all of these other pieces, sense of humor, right? These are a lot of skill sets that you acquire over time, right? You can't download them quickly. These are experience-driven kinds of things. They're often learned in the context of relationships, right? But these are some of the really, I think, important main ingredients of resilience, right? Does that make sense? Okay. If we were to boil down sort of the mindset of a resilient person, it probably also includes a few thoughts or ways of understanding yourself and other people, right? So again, if we imagine sort of a wonderful future for our kids, they're now resilient, they've achieved so many different things, they're ready for any challenge that comes, that kid probably has some of these statements showing up in some form in their mind automatically, right? One would be, I'm competent, I'm good at things, I can do things, right? If you feel that way, you can tackle something new that you've never tackled before with a different mentality, with a different mindset, different psychology. Second one, I'm worthwhile. I matter, right? That's different than feeling competent, right? That's a different kind of sense of grounded meaning in life. Adults can and will help me, right? Adults respect me and believe in me, right? So 2 of those statements are about self. 2 of those statements are about other. Right? We would love for our kids to feel this way, right? The version of my story when my kid was about to walk, I have a feeling he probably felt all those things. The version of the story where I was helping him with homework or not helping him with homework, I'm sure that didn't help him feel any of those things, right? So that's one way of also thinking about, like, how would this show up psychologically? How would this show up in the mind of a child or an adult, right? And you could think probably about your own life journey and figure out, where did you feel these things? Do you feel these things now more often than not? I mean, these aren't static things. They move around with mood and life circumstance, but wouldn't it be great to feel these things? Right? Yeah, it would be great. One of the things that I also emphasize for the faculty today is the growth of resilience happens in repetition, right? Here are all these opportunities in my life to face challenge, and to figure out what happens when I'm faced with this challenge. Here's something new, here's something interesting, here's something novel. What happens next, right? And how those moments go dictate how we feel about ourselves, and it helps us build a sense of resilience, right? And the more opportunities, the more repetition, the faster that grows, the more robust that skill might be. Resilience is really, really tied into academic growth. We ask our kids to spend a lot of time at school doing lots of school things. And those school things are academic, they're social, they're behavioral, they're emotional, right? A lot of life happens at school. And that's where a lot of the reps, the opportunities to build resilience show up, which is why we're having this conversation here in a school, right? And it's why we had the same kind of talk with faculty, because we're all talking about the same kinds of things, right? And you can ask yourself, like, I wonder how many opportunities over the past week my child has had to build some resilience, right? And I don't know what the answer is, but it's more than like 10, and it's probably in the hundreds, if not thousands of opportunities, like little tiny opportunities to do something new, to face something new, to do something again, maybe didn't go so well last time, or maybe to do something again that I actually think I'm good at and continue to build on, right? It's probably thousands of opportunities every week, right? And parents and teachers are probably in the vicinity of these events a lot. Right? And that's why we're talking about this stuff. So anyway, academic growth is really kind of in the epicenter of where resilience comes from. One thing I wouldn't mind just having you reflect on is your own attitude toward anxiety and stress, right? The role that it plays in life, or the role you think it should play in life. And just like, you don't have to give like the intellectual answer. Almost think about, like, just emotionally speaking, when you experience anxiety and stress, what is your sort of posture toward it? What is your attitude toward it? When you think about a kid that you care about experiencing these things, what is your attitude toward it, right? Do you think of it, again, maybe automatically, not necessarily rationally, do you think of it as a disease, a toxic element, a scary thing, a problematic part of life that we should eradicate, that we should get rid of, that we should treat, right? Do you find yourself thinking of it that way? Or do you thinking of yourself as, these are really fascinating, organized responses that we all have and get to benefit from if we know how to manage it, right? Do you think of it more that way, or do you think of it more like a problem to get rid of, right? And you don't have to answer that, but just reflect on that. In an age where a lot of us are hearing these messages about how children and teenagers are experiencing more mental health problems than ever, the world feels like a much scarier place to raise our children. We're worried about kids and their emotional well-being all the time. It's really, in my experience, it's really hard to look at that first one and not just cross it out. Like, you want to look at that one and be like, yeah, I don't know. Is this too much anxiety? Is this too much stress? Is this damaging? Should I just remove all this stuff? Should I get rid of it, right? It's a really common place to be, right? And parents are wired to not tolerate that feeling, right? Like, when our kids are in distress and they're young, we know how to hear those signals, we respond to them, and we fix the problem. We feed them, we move them, we take them out of harm's way. We are wired to fix that problem for them. right? Early caregiver-infant relationships are literally designed to have the kid call for help and us solve the problem. I mean, that is baked in to mammal development. It just is, right? So you've got a ton of your brain real estate dedicated to solving that problem for your child. As they get older, we know we shouldn't be doing all of that all the time. But when do you do it? How does that play out? When do you back out of that equation? When do you let them fall and fail and pep talk them versus when do you do an intervention that really might need to be something more elaborate? These are the questions we're faced with all the time. I mean, look, I'm a parent, I'm a therapist, I've been a teacher. I've had a lot of different hats on, and there's a lot of times where I am very well aware that I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by this kid, right? I don't know, am I doing too much or too little? Am I hitting the nail? I don't know what's going on here, and it can be a really scary place to be. And I also know how hard it is to tolerate my own child's distress. And I'm going to use that word really specifically, how hard it is to tolerate that feeling. My kid is struggling, and this is now a thing I am feeling, and I want to get rid of this feeling. How am I going to do that, right? Am I going to say to myself, well, this is an opportunity for them to learn how to manage this really tough feeling? Am I going to say that to myself? Or am I going to say to myself, like, I got too much to do right now. I got to just get this off my plate. I'm just going to tell the teacher he couldn't do the homework tonight, and we're just going to move on with this, right? These are the kind of moments that happen over and over and over again, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So one of the big pieces I wanted to start sharing with you, and I also share this with faculty, is this word accommodation. So in the current treatment literature for working with kids who have anxiety disorders, right? So these are kids that have much more frequent and much more intense experiences of anxiety that do get in the way of normal development or their day-to-day life. The treatment literature has really, really advanced in some interesting ways over the past decade or so. Prior to that, when I went through my initial clinical training, I was trained in all of these different techniques to have a kid who was experiencing a lot of anxiety and teach them how to identify how they're feeling, teach them coping skills, identify situations that made this feeling get really, really big, and challenge them to now face them with these new skills, right? So let's equip you with a whole bunch of, toolkit of coping skills, go off and do these hard things and master it, right? That was the treatment. And we did it directly with the kid. We usually had parents or caregivers involved to sort of double down and say, like, this is what we're teaching them. We want you to reinforce it at home. Sometimes we would pull in teachers and kind of let them know this is what we're working on. And it's a great model. It works for a lot of kids. Like the vast majority of kids who go through these programs come out on the other side much better at being able to handle their feelings. Over the past decade, one of the things that has come out of the literature is a team of research team at Yale said, well, what if we didn't work with the kids? These same kids that we used to use this really direct intervention directly with them, what if we just work with parents? What if we just work with caregivers, right? And they developed an intervention that was targeting specifically the way that we accommodate anxiety, right? And accommodation is really the things that we do as parents or caregivers that kind of look at the anxiety as a problem to solve or anxiety as a problem to avoid, right? And the researchers basically said, like, well, what if we stopped preventing anxiety? What if we taught parents to just let anxiety happen and coach kids to push through that feeling and tackle the thing anyway, right? And what they found was in way less number of sessions, working with parents directly to sort of teach them sort of how to push through these anxious moments in a different way and not accommodate all of the feelings that come up, they got the same result as like 3 times as much therapy directly with the kids, which also makes sense, right? It makes a ton of sense. And it also sounds really simple. And I'm gonna tell you right now, it's not that simple. Like it sounds really like, oh, okay, I just won't stop the kid from being anxious anymore. It's not that simple. But these concepts I think are really, really powerful. And just from a clinical perspective, we've seen some really, really powerful shifts in kids' development when parents decide that I'm not going to prevent my child from feeling these feelings anymore. And then that takes work on the parents' front, right? What do I have to do to be ready to do that? What do I have to be ready to do to tolerate the fact that my kid is not going to like this at all? They're now going to escalate. They're going to be even more aggressive or more angry or more scared or more sobbing, whatever that's going to look like. And I have to be willing to face it. I have to be willing to also maybe partner for example, with school to do something like that, right? Because if a lot of these issues are tied to school or school performance or homework or whatever that is, the way to do this in conjunction with a school changes the game, it changes it, right? But teachers are also often in the same boat as parents. Like, I don't know, I mean, they're really struggling here. Do I just like not ask them to do this anymore? Or do I ask them to do it with a different idea in mind? And that's really what we're talking about here. There's two primary ways that parents accommodate anxiety. I'm going to describe both of them, and then I'm going to give you a kind of a disclaimer. The first one is modification, right? So this is where any caregiver, a parent, a teacher will say, I don't like this whole anxious thing that's happening in my house. I don't want my kid to experience it. It doesn't seem to be productive. We're not getting anywhere. So I'm going to try to prevent my child from feeling anxiety, right? So that means I'm going to, as the parent, choose where they're doing it, what they're doing, who they're doing it with. I'm going to try to really prevent these moments from being too hard. I don't want them to have that feeling, right? Which we've all done, right? I shouldn't assume. I've done tons of that, right? I've done tons of decision making where I'm like, there's no way my son can handle this right now, so I'm just not going to ask them to do that, right? Or I can see that they're upset, I'm just not going to push it, right? Done that plenty of times. Now, sometimes that's just being pragmatic. I don't have time for this, or this isn't the time, or we'll do it later. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. But one thing to keep in mind is, anytime we do that, there's a message that gets sent to any human, but especially a developing kiddo, that I experience anxiety and then a parent removes the problem. What that does to their sense of what they're afraid of is that it legitimizes the threat, right? Anxiety is a threat detection system, right? Hey, there's something that's important and I'm not sure it's going to be okay. Now I have anxiety about it. So if that gets expressed or stress and a parent removes it, it legitimizes the threat. And what we know is that a lot of the things, actually the vast majority of things that especially younger kids experience anxiety and fear about, their fear system is significantly overestimating the severity of the threat, right? Our fear system and our anxiety system is by design conservative. It doesn't want to take chances, doesn't want to take risks, and it would prefer to signal for help and have a parent swoop in and save. That's a much better way to survive, right? So we are wired to accommodate anxiety this way as parents. We are literally wired to do this, right? The problem is that we've just robbed our child of an opportunity to build resilience, right? We've removed one chance of a repetition from it, right? And every once in a while, that's fine, and that's actually healthy. You know your kid, they actually can't handle this. This is the wrong time to do it. It's actually scary. They're not ready for this. That's fine. If we overuse it, we're robbing our kid of thousands of opportunities to build resilience in a lot of domains. But the legitimacy of it is the really tricky part. Kid kind of says like, well, it is scary to do this. This must actually be something I can't handle. So then that's the other part. The threat is real and I can't handle it, right? Those are two parts that get reinforced every time we accommodate anxiety that way as parents, right? And if it's actually scary, that's appropriate. If it's actually dangerous, that's appropriate. If it's not, right? I mean, one of the examples that comes up a lot is like separation. Like a lot of kids at some point have a hard time separating from their parent, right? They're going from us who are safe to a really safe school, right? This is a teacher who loves you. You know them. You know you're going to have a good time. You've done it a whole bunch of times before, but your brain is saying no. Your brain is saying, nope, not now. Please don't do this to me. And there's a panic or there's whatever that sets in. But we know these are actually safe things. These are not threatening things. Your anxiety system is pushing a button it doesn't need to push, right? But if we say, all right, well, we'll just try again tomorrow. This was really hard. We'll back away. That might solve the problem in the short term in terms of the upset, but it legitimizes the sense that, yeah, you're not ready to handle this separation yet. This might actually be a threatening place to be, right? So there's something to think about in terms of those messages that are unconscious, but they do sort of lay some seeds for something later. The second kind of accommodation is participation, okay? This is where we as parents jump in the anxiety pool with our kid, right? Again, it's not in and of itself a bad strategy, right? I don't want you to, and I'll say this really, really, really clearly. If you've done any of these things with a kid, with your child, it's fine. It's okay. You're a human being. Sometimes you need to do this, right? The issue comes if we're doing this all the time for things that are actually not dangerous, not scary, something they really could handle, right? Because what's actually happening is the kid's emotion becomes the thing. We don't want our kid to feel this feeling. The feeling is the threat, right? That's a little bit of a twist on that. As a parent, unconsciously, we start being like, oh my gosh, every time there's anxiety, it's a nightmare. So now I need to prevent my child from feeling the feeling, right? Now, participation, these are the kinds of things where we know they're going to be anxious, so we're going to jump in often before we realize they need to be jumped in for. It doesn't come randomly, but a lot of times it's our, as a parent, strategy to minimize how much stuff we have to now deal with. You know, if I go and go at drop off and I hang out in the classroom for a half hour, this will go a lot smoother. It's a lot easier. I'll participate in the separation, you know. And in and of itself, that's a fine strategy for a day or two. It's not a good strategy for a year. For most kids. I shouldn't say things in such general terms. There's always different kind of stories here. But you can kind of see where this plays out, right? Am I going to go to the sleepover with my kid when they're 12? Right? Am I going to do that? It's probably not going to work, right? You got to figure out where this is playing out. But again, for parents, this stuff gets really, really emotionally tied in, right? We have a lot of parents who I work with in a lot of different settings who it's like they're doing their homework with their kid, right? And you might even hear parents say things like, what do we have for homework tonight? And they're asking their kid, what do we have going on tonight, right? Because that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like. And by the way, you're supposed to feel that way, right? You are supposed to feel so connected and attached to your kids that there is actually a we that is relevant there. But you can see where that gets dangerous really, really quickly, right? Whose homework is this? What's going on here, right? Answering questions for kids when they don't come out with it right away, co-sleeping with children who have a hard time separating in that way. Again, there's a lot of normalcy in here. I do not want you to read these things and think if you've done it once, you've done something wrong. No, you got to know your kid. You got to know the timing of this. But if you put it onto a longer trajectory of emotional development, the goal here is that we are not accommodating when our kid actually can do something, or we could teach them how to do something. Those are the parts you really want to look for. And that includes dealing with the feeling of distress and anxiety. Like, yeah, when I leave and it's time for bed and I leave your bedroom, you're probably going to feel distress, right? You're going to feel something. You're going to feel something you don't want to feel, and it's going to make it harder for you to fall asleep. I'm going to teach you how to handle that situation, right? What do you do when you can't sleep because you're really afraid? That's a skill set, right? What if I teach you that? And I'm going to ask you to practice that for 10 minutes tonight. And if you're not asleep by 10 minutes, I'll come back in and we'll do what we did before. Tomorrow, I'm going to have that be 15 minutes. I want you to practice a few things that you can do with your mind to help you go to sleep. Day after that, 20 minutes, whatever. You start giving them a ramp to sort of figure out how I can tackle this problem, right? A lot of life does not work if you wait for the feeling to go away, right? What we actually need to be focusing on is teaching kids how to do things while they don't feel good. Does that make sense? That's often not how our instinct works. Our instinct usually works like, let's let you get totally calm and then we'll go do this. You don't have to do that, right? A 9 or a 10 out of 10, probably not a good time to just let them be. Bring them down to a 5 or 6, let them do some things. You don't have to wait for it to go to 0. Yeah, do it with the stress, right? Like public speaking, when people go into treatment for public speaking, or they really want to work on that, the goal is not to get you to a place where you're cool, calm, and collected every time you have to give a speech. It's how do you learn how to do this while you feel a little jacked up? That's the actual goal, right? And that's a different mindset. So anyway, these ways of accommodating are the things that get targeted in this intervention I was mentioning before. Right? So the treatment here would be to say to parents, I want you to document all the different ways you accommodated your child's anxiety this week. What are all the different ways you modified something, you bulldozed, you helicoptered, you participated along with them, you did all these fun things that we sort of pathologize, unfortunately, in our society, but are totally normal and usually totally fine in small doses and often very, very appropriate. But the treatment is, I want you to look at all the different places you did it, and next week I want you to cut that in half. And we're going to teach you how to talk to your kids in those moments differently. We're going to totally change the paradigm. This is not going to be about getting rid of your anxiety. This is going to be about working with your anxiety. I know you feel this way. Yeah, it can be scary to do this. You've never done it before. what are we going to do with that feeling? And then once we get that feeling down to a manageable level, how are we going to tackle the problem? Right? That's going to be the framework that we're going to be working toward. Okay. Just a quick little graphic here that might kind of also drive home some of this point. I don't know if you can read it here, but if you start at the top of this diagram, right, you can kind of imagine this is sort of something that happens when your child is in a potential repetition, like a potential rep where they could be building resilience, could be building some skills, but may not get an opportunity to. It starts with child having anxiety or distress, right? And what happens next? You follow the chart to the right. If there's accommodation, right, I'm going to remove the element that's really scary. I'm going to remove the threat. Then what happens at the next phase is short-term reduction in distress, right? Child has an anxiety response. Parent swoops in, removes the problem. Child feels better, right? That's a very powerful learning experience for kids, right? And what it tells them is when you have a problem, your anxiety system is really good at signaling for help. Your parents are really good at solving problems or removing problems, and that'll make you feel better. Repeat, right? That's what your brain then says. This is how we solve problems, right? And that leads to kids being, especially kids that have more anxiety than maybe some other kids, they tend to learn how to, they overly depend on adults for things, right? Or they feel like they need to avoid things. And that kind of becomes a self-perpetuating system. And it can be really hard for families to know how to move out of that dance. So you get the short-term reduction in distress that leads to continued dependence on parents for regulation. That keeps the symptoms high. So this is what gets really hard to wrap your head around sometimes is what this loop does is actually increase the likelihood of anxiety being higher in the future. Because it teaches the child that's the right response. Get better at that response. Here's a problem. You can't handle these problems. Your parents are the ones you need to go to parent these problems. And so kids typically sort of start looking like more and more helpless in their behavior, more and more frantic, more and more panicky. You actually see the intensity increase, not necessarily like tomorrow, but over a longer period of time, these patterns can become pretty entrenched. And then when kids get older and they start seeing other kids doing things more readily, then you start seeing shame enter the mix, right? Why is everybody else able to do this? I can't do this. Everyone seems to go to the sleepover. I can't stay past 10 o'clock at night. It's those kinds of things that start to sort of get baked into it, right? And it's not what we want, right? We want our kids to be able to sort of increase their independence, right? Okay, so why do we do that? Why do caregivers accommodate that? I mean, if it seems like such an obviously bad idea, why do we do it? Well, one is we just have this a moment in time where now our child is distressed, that makes us distressed, and that really is not where we want to spend our time. So let's get rid of that. I want you to feel better, so I feel better, right? There is a sense that maybe too much stress or anxiety is harmful or toxic. Maybe in a less extreme sense, it's not worth it. But we reason with that all the time. Sometimes it's just about the need to get through this moment. There could be a lot of things. A lot of kids who have really intense anxiety are also aggressive in these moments. They're not calmly anxious. They're really hard to control, or the behavior gets really difficult to manage. And those are not easy moments to know how to do. But it's extremely normal. So if you're here tonight and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally do this, and I do too much, and I don't feel bad about that. What you did is what we're all wired to do, especially when we have a child who maybe is more feeling these things more intensely and more frequently than others, right? You're probably acting with compassion, or at least just your own survival. It's okay. Trust me, it's okay. I mean, there's a reason why, we know kids over their lifespan will probably be like 30 to 40% of them will have some sort of moment of really intense anxiety that gets in the way of life. I mean, it's kind of normal to be in these states. So as a parenting perspective, you're in good company. But when we think about over and under accommodation, like you really want to find the Goldilocks sweet spot here, right? If we're over accommodating, it increases patterns of avoidant behavior. And avoidant behavior is really the mechanism that makes life feel small, increasingly small over time for kids and teens, right? I can't handle lots of life, so that the only parts I feel comfortable in are these really small pieces of life. So increases avoidance, and this concept of learned helplessness That's that idea that I can't handle things on my own. I've learned that I can't do it. If I put in effort, it doesn't work. And that is increase the risk of depression. It increases the risk of a whole bunch of stuff that we don't want our kids to have to experience. It also stands in the way of developing coping skills. It also kind of like decentralizes where experience goes. Like a lot of kids who have anxiety for a long period of time lose their sense of self, right? They feel like I can only exist with a parent, or I can only exist with a teacher. And that affects self-esteem. It affects a whole bunch of stuff that becomes problematic. And it really stops this idea of like the motivation for changing situations on their own. Like they just sort of shut down in that regard. They're more passive in life. They don't engage with the next thing the way, developmentally speaking, we would want to. So you can see how this stuff would play out if that's what the repetition looks like. So one thing just to reflect on right now, and again, this isn't something you answered tonight. This is something you kind of take with you and you reflect on as you go through your day, next week or so. Ask yourself these questions. How do you accommodate your child's anxiety and stress? When is it helpful? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes what you're doing there is you're giving them the chance to actually function in all the other ways of their life because we remove this thing you're just not ready for yet. That's good strategic parenting, right? There are times you're accommodating and that is a good thing. When are the times where it might feel unhelpful or it might feel like you're trending toward unhelpful, right? We were talking earlier today with the faculty about a lot of times these kinds of questions can't be answered within a day or a week. They have to actually be answered over longer periods of time, months and years, right? Is my child trending toward being able to master this? Or does it seem like the current setup is set up to sort of, keep them treading water, emotionally speaking, right? So that's just something to reflect on and think about, right? And the cool thing is that if you catch yourself in a moment where you're like, wow, for the past month, I've just been way over accommodating things. Like you change that tonight, you change that tomorrow, you get into a new groove, new routine, effects can happen very quickly, right? This is not the kind of stuff where like, well, you had one shot to do this right and you didn't do it, so sorry. It doesn't work that way. Humans can turn this stuff around and adapt and get into new emotional culture very quickly, especially when it's coordinated across like home and school, for example. Okay. So I had mentioned this treatment before, right? That's really focusing on parents and how they're approaching these moments. Goal number one is stop taking away anxiety, stop taking away stress. And then goal number two is allow kids to have practice feeling these things, but then put some scaffolding and structure around those moments so that they learn how to handle those moments differently. The first step is just validating and acknowledging emotions, right? This is not something that I did with my son when he was struggling with his math homework, right? I wasn't like, it seems like you're feeling really upset by this. It seems like this is something you don't think you can do right now. I didn't say anything remotely that useful, right? In fact, what I probably did was just shame him, right? Either in my tone or my words. I don't know. I barely remember exactly what I said. I think I just blocked it out. But like, it's such a clear moment where what I did not do was tell him that what he was feeling is a perfectly normal thing that happens to all of us when we're doing homework after a long day when you're an 8, right? Like I didn't tell him that it's normal to feel these things. I didn't give him a chance to just notice what this feeling felt like, to notice it in a context of like love and compassion and safety. I didn't do that, right? Validating and acknowledging is not agreeing with, right? If we could have read my son's mind at that time, his thoughts probably would have been like, I just can't do this. I'm so stupid. Why do I have to do this? A whole bunch of stuff like that, right? I don't have to, validation doesn't mean, yes, I agree that you can't do this and this is too hard. That is not what validation is. Validation is just like, I understand that this is how you feel. I think I would feel the same way too. And I'm sorry you feel that. You express compassion that he feels this way. I'm sorry, buddy. I know this is probably a long day, right? I know. This is hard. We're going to do it. What do we need to do, right? Validate and acknowledge. Then express confidence in their coping abilities or express confidence that we're going to figure this out, right? That's a step that a lot of kids aren't able to self-generate, right? They're in distress and they signal their distress. I'm pretty sure that moment when my son first did it, when he slammed, it was just like the first time he slammed the table out of frustration, right? He's doing like math homework. And like his teacher was like mortified when he heard it later. He's like, oh my God, that's what, I was like, yeah, that's okay. This kid who's, my son's pretty mild mannered, and he slams the table. And I was so annoyed by the fact that that's how he acted. I was disappointed that he wasn't just like an easy kid to do his homework on his own. Like I had all those, I know what my feelings were if I'm honest about it, right? And I showed him all of those feelings. I didn't show him that, look, buddy, I totally understand this, how you're feeling. It's been a long day. I'm with you. Look, I'm going to tell you this right now. I know you can figure this out, but maybe not yet. Maybe we got to do something with how you feel first. That would have been a much better response. And I didn't even approximate that. Right? But showing confidence, like, look, we're going to get through this. We just got to figure out how we're going to do this, right? Step one may be, you're feeling pretty hot right now. Let's just take a quick break. We'll come back to this in like a minute, see if we can cool off. Maybe we need another minute. That's cool. I'll do it with you too. Yeah, like it's that kind of thing. Now I'm participating in this, but I'm participating in these steps, right? Does that feel a little bit different, right? Expressing confidence in their ability, and then help face the anxiety or the stress or the frustration, whatever. Insert any negative emotion here, and it's the same idea. We're going to go through this. We're not going to go around it, right? Step one is we got to handle the feeling. Step two, then we tackle the problem. And I will be with you to handle this feeling as long as it takes, because I know you can do it, right? Again, look, in real life, it's not going to sound that pretty. That script won't just be like, you're right, Dad, thanks for giving me. It's not going to be that moment. It's not going to look like that. But the spirit of it can be very different. And I'm telling you, it can be very powerful. And again, these are not things that are going to be mastered quickly. If all of a sudden you start doing this, you're going to get a result in 2 days. No, you're not. It's going to take a while to turn this thing around, right? But fast forward, I don't know, a month, and we've changed how those moments feel during homework, for example, right? Okay, cool. We've built some things here, right? And then we can debrief that. Be like, oh, remember what we did last month? I just yelled at you. That didn't work, right? By the way, show your emotional work too. If you had a day where you lost control, name it. Like, I'm going to be honest. I think I was really stressed out. I think I was really frustrated. I took it out on you. It wasn't fair to you. I'm sorry. I've realized now I shouldn't have I need to pay more attention to how I'm feeling when it's time to help you with something. I'm sorry about that, right? That's good showing your work role modeling, right? Own it. You can always redo it. That's a hugely impactful thing to do for kids. When we work with families therapeutically, like, math teachers want your kids to show their work, right? Long division, show your work. So I know what didn't, like, do that for your kids with your own emotional work. Show your emotional work to your kids. When you're feeling good things and when you're feeling not so good things. Talk about it. Label it with them. Show them that you are emotional beings, because that changes their sense of who you are. So many kids look at us and think we couldn't possibly have the same feelings they do because you don't act the way that they do, right? That's the way they understand adults, right? Like, oh, no, I feel all those things too. Slamming your desk? Oh yeah, I almost did it 5 times today. Can I tell you about that? Like, and here's what helped me. Or here's what didn't help me. That is some of the best teaching you can give your kid. It also brings you closer, right? I mean, how many times have you had a moment in your life where you got really close to someone in the context of negative emotion, right? A shared experience you went through together, a moment you had to work through where it didn't go well, but then you like made up. Like those are the moments where you actually get closer to people, right? If you handle it the way that I handle it with my son, we did not get closer that night. We got farther away, right? So validating, acknowledging, express confidence in their ability, and help face the anxiety. And helping face anxiety is one of 2 things. It's either deal with the feeling, and let's talk about what that is. You got to bring your body down. You got to calm your body down. You're going to take a walk. You don't need rocket science here. Nothing fancy. The stuff that helps you calm down, do that, right? Or you solve the problem, right? And that's what coping is. Coping is either handling a feeling or solving a problem, or you do one before you do the other. And a lot of kids need coaching in that realm, right? Help me bring the feeling down. That's what I actually need. I know how to do the math, right? In that example I gave you, my son knew the math. The math wasn't the problem. The problem was how frustrated he felt at himself for it not coming quickly when he was hungry and tired. That was the problem. Like, buddy, you're hungry and tired. I think we need to get a snack in you. We need to take a walk. And let's try it again. Let's see what happens. Maybe you get a different result. If you don't, let's do it again. Figure something else out. Digest it more. Whatever. Like you get into that sort of mindset of problem solving the emotional piece, and then you're problem solving the actual issue. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, there's another, let me just keep an eye on that. Okay. There's another area of research that's been really kind of parallel to this. That's not necessarily treatment of like an anxiety disorder. It comes more from just parenting and the effects of how parents approach emotional moments with their kids. And a team of researchers, it's really like several decades old body of research now, but it looked at parents as being kind of one of two styles. And this is painting with very broad strokes, but I think you'll get the idea. Emotion coaching versus emotion dismissing parents, right? So again, reflect on this a little bit. Most of us are often a little bit of both, depending on the day or the mood. But this is really looking at what happens in a moment when our child's having a feeling. What is our posture toward those moments? What is our attitude toward those moments? How do we see our role in those moments? So emotion coaching versus emotion dismissing, it's going to be what you think it is, right? Coaching parents had higher tolerance of their child's negative feelings. This is like they measure this in all these different ways. Some of it was even just like heart rate stuff, right? Like a parent who were able to coach their kids through emotional moments could actually tolerate their child having distress, right? Now look, again, I'm just talking about myself. I won't assume anything about you, but there are times where I cannot tolerate my kids not just being easy. It's like I can't take it anymore. It's that feeling when you're on the brink, right? So again, these aren't like you're only one or the other. You're probably both. But you got to figure that out on your own about when to engage and when not to engage. So coaching parents were more tolerant of their child's distress. And they also like philosophically didn't see negative emotions as harmful or toxic. Right? And I encourage you to think that way too. Negative emotions are not harmful or toxic. Elevated levels of trauma, that's toxic. But day-to-day anxiety and stress is as safe as anything you can put into your body. Our bodies were built to do it. We survived as a species because of it. We are perfectly equipped to have that cortisol and adrenaline flowing through our bodies. We are literally wired very well to do that, and your kid will be okay. Them being stressed is not dangerous, right? Even very stressed, that's not dangerous, right? Especially in like a given night. Nope, perfectly fine. So imagine, but again, I'm guessing that's not how you feel in the moment. That probably doesn't feel safe. And I get that, right? But if you imagine that it is, it might actually change the way you tolerate those moments. And when you can do that, you get to be able to think about saying lots of different stuff than if you're dealing with your own intolerance of the feeling. That it's the moment when you make it about them and not about you, right? Dismissing parents experience high levels of personal distress in response to their child's emotions, right? So that's the real differentiating factor. Physiological changes in the adult, right? So coaches have that tolerance, and what they do is they lean into emotional moments. They're more likely to even seek them out. One of the ways you can think of it is when my child is the next time your child has an emotional moment, does the thought go through your head like, oh, great. Here's a learning opportunity, right? Right? Now, I don't really expect you to do that, but kind of like, what if you did? Right? Like, what if you could actually lean into those moments as not scary? They're annoying, or they're like inconvenient, or they're poorly timed, or they're getting in the way of what you want to do. Yep, all that's true, and that will make it hard to tolerate. You don't have to do it every time, I promise. You can pass 9 of them go, but if you hit the 10th one, something cool happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Right? Because life happens. Like you can't just drop everything and now your full-time job is to be this emotional coach. No, that's preposterous. You can't do that. And your kids don't need that. They really don't. But regularly, they would really benefit from it. And it would change your relationship, and it teaches your kids a whole array of things they wouldn't have been able to learn otherwise. They also can see you as an emotionally available person, right? It's the version of me that showed up when my kid was about to walk, not the one who was annoyed about the homework, right? One of the other things that you can think about from an emotion coaching perspective is it's the expression of empathy and validation. So if you're asking yourself like, okay, fine, I hear you. I want to lean into these moments, but what do I do? What do I say? What would be a nice thing to do for my kid in these moments? Well, first, just listen. Start with open-ended questions, right? How did you feel? What happened? What happened next, right? By the way, these are often hard questions for kids to answer. They don't store memories the way we wish they do. I am a therapist, and I am constantly in these moments, in these conversations where I know something significant happened, and I'm trying to get this kid to tell me the story, and I know less after they tell me than I did before, right? It's like, who? And even questions like, how did you feel? They're very hard for kids to answer precisely because they're just not storing memory that way. But it's okay to ask, like, how are you feeling right now? What do you think happened? Why do you think this went this way? Right? Start with open-ended questions. Yeah.
I have a question about that because my kid is like very emotional, but he's not able to express that.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to really know how to handle it.
Yes. So a big part of emotional development over the lifespan is taking something that typically happens that's more about like body and feeling and turn it into language, right? A lot of emotion regulation that adults do is very language driven, right? I'm going to use self-talk to think myself through this. I'm going to talk to someone about the problem. I'm going to do these things with my words. Kids often don't start there, and they learn it slowly, right? So one thing that I don't know if I emphasize enough here, one basic thing you can do to help any kid with their emotional development is you start using emotion language more often, right? When you're telling a story, insert how you were feeling, insert how the character was feeling, label the feeling, use it a lot. The more kids get exposed to literally the frequency of emotion words in their day-to-day life, it speeds up their process of learning that same skill. Right? Lots of kids also really benefit from like feelings cards or charts that show emotion and don't require them to use a word to do that. That's a great thing to have, even for older kids. You may think that's like a younger kid thing. It's not. I mean, I have teenagers that I work with who would they'll like look at a chart and like they'll come up with a way better answer than if I just asked them verbally what's going on.
He's able to recognize the emotion and tag the emotion, say, I'm sad, or angry. But it's hard for him to talk about what happens to feel like that. So that's what I'm trying to work with him.
And that'll come. I mean, so sometimes what ends up happening is you're going to scaffold this. Like maybe all they can tell you is how they feel. And you might have to fill in the gaps, right? We don't typically want to like tell kids how they're feeling and then tell them why. Like you don't want to go down that path too far. But it's okay to say like, listen, I have a feeling you were really nervous. You told me you were scared. Yeah, it makes sense you were nervous because you had never done this before. And you weren't sure how it was going to play out. Try something like that and see what they were able to give back to you. Because they may, in fact, be able to totally say like, yes, that's exactly what happened, right? Many, many times, a powerful thing happens when we take a guess, a gentle guess, and we nail it, right? Then all of a sudden, they now have a story, right? Kids really do benefit from the story that we often tell around emotions. Like, well, let's tell the story again. All right, so now that I've heard everything that happened, sounds like when you were waiting your turn to speak, the other person said what you were going to say, and then you didn't know what to say next, and then you felt really disappointed because you really were excited to say that. Like, yes. Like a lot of times the kids are just like, yes, thank you. That's exactly what was happening. But they can't put it into that story. So sometimes thinking in terms of the narrative or the story and then trying it out with them, using the emotion label is a really powerful thing to do. You're not going to get it right every time. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So don't tell them how to feel. Oh my gosh, by the way, another thing that I do all the time, I'm a therapist, I should know better. So I have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old, and this is a lot what's happening with my 7-year-old right now. My 7-year-old's got big feelings all over the place. And I will find myself, she'll say something like, I can tell she's scared of something. And she'll be like, I don't know, I don't want to talk to them, they're scary. And I'll say something like this, they're not scary, right? And I know what I mean, and you know what I mean, and she probably knows what I mean, but like, why did I say it that way, right? Validating her would say like, I think I can understand why you're feeling scared right now. When I think about it, I think this is something you can do. and I don't think it's going to hurt you. That's a way better way to say it. But when I say that's not scary, that is literally an invalidating statement, right? I'm telling her emotion's wrong. No, her emotion is not wrong. Emotions aren't wrong. That's just not a useful framework. Emotions can be disproportionate. They can happen because you missed something. But the emotion itself is something I need to connect with you on, not tell you that you got it wrong. But see, this is what we do when we try to solve the problem. A lot of times this is about us. I want this problem to go away. You are wrong in how you feel. If you feel the way I'm telling you you should feel, this problem goes away. Right? How many times does that work? It has never worked in human history. Right? So don't tell them how they feel. Practice empathic and reflective listening. It seems like you feel this way. I bet this is how you're feeling. Right? You can also do that with a compassionate statement. Like, I wish you didn't feel scared right now, because I think that's actually a really nice dog. Right? Empathic listening and compassionate listening. Right? That doesn't sound like you're doing something because you're not solving a problem. You are doing an incredible thing for your child when that's what you're doing. I'm showing you that I care about you. I'm showing you that I understand your feelings. Your feelings are understandable, right? You matter to me. All of that gets packaged in these empathic moments. And then express confidence in your ability to cope or learn to cope. Like, I know you feel scared in these situations right now. And I know you can do this. And maybe you don't feel confident yet, but I think you can get there. And here's how we're going to do that. Here's what I want you to practice. Here's what I want you to try. Try it with me. How about I do it first? I'll do it first, then you do it after me. Right? Like, that's the kind of thing that often helps, especially younger kids, start taking a step down the path of recognizing just because I feel something doesn't mean I have to believe it. Just because I feel something doesn't mean that I have to ask for help. Just because I feel it doesn't mean I can't do it. And I'm going to show you that there's a bridge to get from where you are now to where I think you could be. Does that make sense? Right. So I know, look, I'm giving you like the general idea of these things. In practice, it's much messier, right? And that's okay. Again, 9 of them can be whatever they were before, but if the next one has a little bit of this in it, it'll change the way kids are thinking about things, and it'll change the way you can talk about it with your kids too. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to very quickly kind of wrap some things up, and then I'll open it up for some questions before we wrap. Yeah. Okay. I think what I'll end is this idea, right? Because there's a lot of ways you can leave a talk like this and be like, well, there's like 1,000 different ways I could be doing this, right? Here's what I want you to focus on. Ask yourself, well, first of all, for your own self, right? A lot of us don't actually think this way. We have lots of goals in life, right? If I asked you right now, like, well, what's kind of a goal you're working on right now? You could probably tell me. But more often than not, they don't come about emotions. You might ask yourself, like, what's my emotional goal right now? What am I working on as an adult, right? What do I want to get better at doing? What are some of the feelings that really still grab me and I really want to get a little bit more hold on them, right? What's my emotional goal right now? And what do I need to do to work on my goal? Right? That's just good human stuff. Reflect on it, work on it. It's cool. Now imagine if your kid could also ask those questions of themselves, right? What's your emotional goal right now? What do you need to do to work on that, right? It could be very small. It could be very simple. A lot of times early on, it could just be like, I want you to practice telling me how you feel. That's what I want you to do. Whether it's good things, not so good things, just tell me. Let's practice that. I feel like we don't do that enough. And sometimes this is just the family culture. We're going to do this a little bit more. Hey, I realize we don't talk about our feelings a lot. We're going to start doing that. Yeah, it's going to be awkward at first. We're going to be vulnerable at first. Let's get weird with it. That's okay. Let's try it, right? And all of a sudden, what happened is over that month, that child was exposed to 500 more instances of an emotion word that they use. They're going to be using that in their thinking in a way that they hadn't been able to do that before, right? It could also be a very specific coping goal, right? Especially situations that recur, right? Like stress around homework or, stress around, a social situation or whatever, they tend to keep happening, right? Yeah, look, I know. Yeah, this is hard. Every time you go to the playground, you have to deal with this kid. It's really frustrating. Let's talk about that. Let's keep practicing that. Next time, what do you think you're going to feel? Yeah, you're going to probably feel frustrated. Well, instead of doing what you did last time, let's see what you can do differently. I mean, just set it up for them and put that into a story, right? If you see an opportunity where they can learn an emotional goal that happens in a recurring story in their life, it's a beautiful opportunity to say like, well, let's imagine, what could this story sound like tomorrow? What could this look like next time? And then child can articulate that, and there's probably a lot of skills that you can kind of work on in there, right? Not every situation has to be a learning opportunity, but just pick a few, if that makes sense, right? Why don't I break here? There's a lot more that I would have loved to have talked about tonight, but it all kind of comes from the same place. But let me just open it up to see if there's a few questions before we wrap tonight.
How about for kids where it's like transition or schedule changes are very stressful? Is it an unhelpful accommodation to warn them about those kinds of things?
So, and it's a great question, and it's very kid dependent, and it's also like mood dependent and situation dependent, right? There are a lot of kids where if you give them a preview of the transition, it's the thing that unlocks the problem, right? I just don't like being surprised by this, right? And you've solved the problem. There's other kids where that will cause anxiety that didn't need to be there. It's all that, do you tell your kid they're going to get a shot at the doctors today or not? Like it's that dilemma that plays out. But with a kid who gets old enough, and by old enough, I would probably say 5 or 6, if it happens a lot, like, look, I've noticed that when you change from doing one thing to another, or you move from one class to another, or we go from, home to practice or whatever, like, it seems like it's really hard. Like, what are you feeling? Just see what you can get out of that situation. Be like, how can we get this to go a little smoother? Do you want me? And then experiment. Be like, no, I'm gonna experiment for a week. I'm gonna tell you 5 minutes before we go, we're gonna do this. Let's see how that works. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else this week. You have an idea? Let's do it. Engage them in the problem solving, right? And I would just sort of keep joining that. And again, I think one of the other sort of general answers I can give to that is when you don't know if there's a better way, just decide that as a culture, your family's going to try to tackle this together, right? Make it about how the family does this, right? Like, yeah, why don't we try something different? Let's try something completely new. Do you have an idea? Let's try that. Even if it doesn't generate a solution that feels better, what it's done is you've talked about, like, as a family, we're leaning into emotional moments. We don't have to get them perfect every time, but I want to hear what you have to say. I give them some ownership over the process. And a lot of times kids really do come up with great strategies, or it's because their strategy that they want to actually try it. So anyway, that's a general answer I can give, but those kinds of things are also often really nuanced and specific to the kids. So yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Any ways in with kids who are very resistant to suggestions, support? My daughter's 15. She's always thought she's got all the answers. She's been struggling a lot. And, I'm trying to put lots of supports in place, but she's constantly resisting.
Yeah. So, well, there's like the hour answer I could give to that, and then there's the really quick one. The quick one probably has 2 parts. One is a lot of times as parents we're planting seeds that we never get to see grow in front of us because our kids don't want us to know that we have that influence. Like there's some dynamic that gets in the way of that power there. But say something, they'll tell you how bad of an idea that is, and then walk away. And then don't bring it up again, and then imagine that it might still be in there as an idea, right? So that's, I have seen that so many times. Or it's a seed that doesn't grow for 3 years, right? So I know you probably didn't want to hear that, but that's probably sometimes happening. The other thing is so especially with teenagers, like you really have to find the time and the environment and the setting of those conversations is more important than any other time in life. Right? The setup, the situation. Like, there's some classic kind of tropes here where if you're having that conversation, but you're not looking at each other, you're like next to each other in a car, it's different, right? Or if you're engaged in an activity, it's different. In my practice, we have a room with a ping pong table. And I don't know why, but if we're playing ping pong, I can get the most locked down kid to talk about some of the most deep, dark stuff. But if I put the paddle down, they're like, why, what are we doing? Like they just won't, it's this amazing difference. So I would just say like, shake it up, try again, but a different time, different place, different setting. And sort of that of like disarming the kind of process that they're used to. But there's a lot of power dynamics in adolescence. There's a lot of other reasons behind some of that stuff. There's a lot of shame and there's a lot of vulnerability and resistance to being vulnerable that are also there. So maybe even a better answer for you is to think about what might it look like if I reduced their vulnerability, right? If I pick a time and a place where vulnerability might be kind of easier to work with. I don't know. You may also have to wait for a few years. It depends on the situation. Yeah. So if I have time for one more question, I think you had a question. Yeah.
Comment question. So, am I understanding that anxiety and resilience are like almost like partners?
So
To a degree, so like you're pushing them through, not around, when they have these anxious moments to
yeah.
build resilience.
Yes.
And to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I'm probably oversimplifying some of this, and I'm using anxiety as a term that also might include stress and other kinds of things that are hard to deal with. But if I think about resilience as not the absence of negative emotion, resilience is I'm doing it with my emotion on board, right? I'm feeling anxious and I'm doing it anyway. The anxiety isn't the thing that's going to stop me from doing it, right? Or whatever feeling. It could be. I mean, I think you could insert almost anything for that, right?
I'm thinking of avoidance is what I deal with.
Yeah.
So then there's the resilience that I try to build. I know you hate this.
Yeah.
I hate it too.
Yep.
Things I hate it too. I hate doing wide intercept and slow. I hate
Yeah.
I hate it's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
I need a break. You need a break? I need a break. You need a break? I need a break. So
Yes.
you know, and then the next morning it's you did a great job last night. I think I did a great job too last night because I didn't lose my cool. You know.
Yep.
So but
Yes.
then there's the stomping of the feet but walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that works and it feels great.
Yeah.
I feel like I had a win, but then there's
I know.
stopping the feet. You don't like me, and under the cover,
I know.
and crazy.
I know.
Crazy.
Yep.
Crazy comes.
Yep.
And that's what I find is sometimes hard to look for resilience in that moment
Totally.
of the crazy.
Yes. And right.
Chocolate over there, because you know who my crazy is.
Well, and that's well, and this is what's hard about parenting the older the kids get, because like I knew my son was going to eventually walk. If it wasn't that night, it was going to be soon. I 100% knew he was going to walk. But when they're older, I don't know if you're not going to be a lunatic when something's hard next time. Like I don't know. Is this just who you are forever now? Like, right? That's a different thing, right? Now, I can tell you, like clinically and developmentally, like she's gonna be all right. Like life isn't gonna be filled with y-intercepts anymore either. Like there's so much that's gonna change, and the emotion systems absolutely change over time. But it doesn't mean that we just back out of it and just be like, well, you'll figure it out someday. Like, no, let's lean into it. And I think the way you just talked about it sounds beautiful. Like that sounds like exactly, yeah. No, sometimes we're gonna do it. But again, I also sense that there's sort of a togetherness in that. Like my role is to not lose my cool. Your role is to sort of do these other things. And there are times where I'm gonna not do so good and you are, blah, blah, blah. And okay. I love that. That sounds to me like a really nice kind of arena for these things to grow. And that also gets to mean there are nights that don't go well, and then you practice other skills like coming back together after a night that didn't go so well, right? There's a whole bunch of relationship stuff that you learn there too, right? This is what it's like to say sorry. This is what it's like to hear me say sorry. This is what it's like to think about this as us doing this better together next time. Like that's really valuable. So you don't have to engineer those on purpose, but when they do show up, that's what you get to do. But listen, I really appreciate tonight. I think we do have to wrap, but I put my contact information up here. I'm happy to share the slides if you'd like. I love talking about this stuff. I think this is both some of the hardest, but also some of the most meaningful things that we get to do with our kids. So thank you for coming tonight, and appreciate the questions, and feel free to reach out in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.